Hey everyone, welcome to the John Top of It show. I am your host, John Meisberg, and today I wanted to use my platform to amplify Black voices. And so I figured it'd be great to start with one of my best friends, Robert Brown. Robert, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, man. Thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here. Happy to have a conversation.
So for our viewers out there, we're going to be discussing the current protests around police reform that were kickstarted by the murder of George Floyd. And we're also going to get into some proposed reforms as well. So first of all, Robert, I've listened to a lot of people of color online, and I've talked to people of color at different protests, and I've also conducted some research online. Regardless of all that, I'm mainly interested in your perspective on all of these topics we're going to discuss today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lead with asking you a question to get your perspective first, and then afterwards, if there's anything of value that I can add, I will, and then we can talk about that as well. Is that cool?
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'd like to start off by hearing from your perspective, why do you think there's such a large protest going on right now?
People of color are just fed up with everything that's going on. I mean, every other day on the news you hear about unarmed black men being shot, or somebody being harassed, or life experiences like my personal experiences with people harassing me because of the color of my skin. I believe that people are just fed up, and this is just something that was stewing for a very, very long time, and it just exploded.
What do you think makes this time different? I feel like something will happen, and then there'll be like a ruckus about it, and then it just fades into the background. But this is different.
Well, what's different about it, that I've noticed at least, is that this past few years, people have been protesting a lot, not just about Black lives. People have been protesting for, women's rights, and you've had that whole protest on Charlottesville. So it's a matter of people are fed up, and it's that time for at least the people of color to say something.
Yeah.
I mean, especially when you've got a person in office who says things like, about Mexicans, and what he said about, people, like just different people of color. It's like insane. Like, who says that?
I think Trump is definitely not helping the situation at all.
Yeah.
So basically what we're saying is like, it's reached like a point where, something had to give. And so we've reached that point. Something that I had read online is that maybe if people had listened to all of the protesting when things were peaceful, we wouldn't have riots now. Like Kaepernick, how he was trying to protest peacefully by kneeling down in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't allowed to do that. He ended up getting blackballed from the NFL and punished for it.
Yeah.
And, there's several examples of people trying to protest peacefully and it not really leading anywhere. And so it's kind of like, well, people are saying, if you're not going to listen to me when I act peacefully, well, here's the next step.
Well, I mean, I believe that a lot of the people that have been rioting and looting, they just decided to do something bold. And I don't believe the people in the protests, agree with it. I think that, again, it was something that was bound to happen.
Yeah.
It's just, when people were pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, they reach a certain point and it's like a pot that explodes. If you don't, if you're boiling water and you don't watch it, it explodes.
I will never forget watching that police station burn down in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be like in the history books for sure.
Yeah. Well, I saw an article that they actually caught the guy that did it. and he apparently posed as a police officer. That's how he was able to get through.
Oh my God.
So there's an article on it. If you like, I'll share it to you. I mean, there's been so much crazy news coming up through social media that some of it's true, some of it's not true, some of it's half true, and that also has been fueling a lot of the anguish between a lot of these people. Like, this has been fueling a lot of the anger. I can only go back to the fact that this is something that was bound to happen.
Yeah. I think another thing that I think has made this time different is coronavirus has impacted employment. So there's a lot of people out of work that are upset and they have a lot of free time.
True.
At least in Seattle, I see a lot of that with my friends, and they're like, I'm not working. I'm pretty upset about how everything's going around me. And I want to go protest against police officers and reform the police department and stand up for Black rights. And I have all the time in the world to do it now. When you have a 40-hour-a-week job, it really drains you. And, you can be a weekend warrior where you're going out on the weekend to do this kind of stuff. But it really takes a lot out of you to protest every day.
Yeah, sure does.
If anyone wants to help the situation right now, like, what would help most in your opinion if people had to focus their energy into a few things?
I mean, if people have the ability to protest, of course protest, because it's your right. At the same time, do the research on the people that are running for office. Do the research on people that are running for the Senate. Do the research on people that are running for the House. Because those are the people that are going to make the laws, that are going to be responsible for changing things for the better.
Yeah.
You can protest an issue, but you put people in office that are only going to be responsible for one thing, then they're going to overlook issues like racism. Most people didn't believe it existed. People even said, "Oh, well, it ended in the 60s."
Yeah. They think we live in a post-racial America because Obama got elected, not understanding the concept of tokenism.
Yeah.
But people focus so much on how we have to make sure that the president is the right person. But focusing on local government, such as your city council, is just as, if not more important to how your life is affected, because they're the ones that interact with your local police department.
Yes, exactly.
So that's a really good point. I also found a pretty interesting website called blacklivesmatter.card with 2 R's .co. And I'll put a link in the description. But this website basically just has like a repository of a lot of different useful links if you want to get involved in protesting for police reform and helping Black people get equal rights.
Well, I mean, from my opinion, it's not just Black people.
Yeah.
Black people are, they have suffered a lot. I have suffered a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. There's so many other cases of where white people have been beaten or hurt or killed.
Sure.
There have been so many cases of Hispanic people, same thing.
Yeah.
So many other cases of Asians. It's a broad spectrum. It is a higher percentage when it comes to African American or Black, but it's still, nonetheless, it needs to change.
For sure. I think it's a topic right now because the police officer involved in George Floyd's murder was white and George Floyd was Black. And so people, they think there has to be a racial component here because he, held him down by his neck for almost 9 minutes in a brutal way when he didn't need to do that. And so what some people could say, oh, that's just excessive force, but it has nothing to do with race. A lot of people are saying, how could you think that there isn't a racial component involved in that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think anytime there's an incident where there is a police officer involved and there has been some type of racial fueled situation,
Hmm.
and at least from my experience, 9 times out of 10, it is racially motivated, when it shouldn't even be there. I've had incidences in my life where I've had officers, or not necessarily just officers, but just people of authority would say things to me with the assumption that I believe something, or that I speak a certain way, or that I have this, like, I guess, thug mentality or whatever.
They're like, I don't know what it is. It's just maybe the way you look, something about the color of your skin.
Something
It's
like,
just,
yeah,
I
yeah.
just, I can't put my finger on it.
I've had incidences where I've gone to restaurants and I've waited,
Yeah.
and then the next person that came in got served, and they just ignored me. And I've had incidences where I've gone to uh, a friend's house, and the other person was like, "Do you belong here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's my friend's house. Like, I came here to visit a friend."
I can't even imagine, like, you deal with so many situations that I just honestly am privileged that I never have to even think about. And I'm your friend, and like, I don't want you to suffer that way. It's really kind of upsetting to hear stuff like that. But I actually, in relation to what you were saying earlier, I read about a study that was done in Chicago that Black men are about 14 times more likely to experience a use of force than white men for the same crimes.
Yeah. Hmm.
You don't hear that on Fox News.
No, of course not. Of
No,
course not.
that's an inconvenient truth. That's 13 times too many.
Like I said, there have been so many different incidences, and just, and I'm sure there's so many different people in their lives, people of color, who've experienced it. Like, especially when people come up to you, and they just greet you with a stereotype, as if that's how you are. When you're
Mhm.
just another person, you're an individual, but they talk to you as if you're a stereotype or a statistic.
Mhm.
You're a statistic. Like some of these statistics are just made up. I constantly get reminded by my family not to be a statistic.
What kind of advice do they give you? To just be like cautious around police
Um,
officers, or?
well, not necessarily to be cautious. I mean, like, my family has never taught me to be afraid of police,
Mhm.
because they weren't supposed to be there to instill fear. They're supposed to
Mhm.
be there for protection.
Mhm.
Um, but they always did tell me to make sure that I did not bring any unwanted attention to myself by doing things that would bring that kind of attention to me. Like, you know, make sure my tags are good.
Yeah.
Make sure I don't have a cracked tail light. Make sure I don't have anything that I could possibly get pulled over for. Because
Yeah.
there are some times that I can get pulled over in my car, which has happened on numerous occasions, where I've been pulled over because I was considered a suspicious driver.
You were DWB,
Yes, yes,
driving while black.
yes. And even that itself isn't a crime, but it has happened, and it has caused me to be late to work. It has caused me to uh, be late to any other things that I've been trying to get to on time. And all I could say is, "Oh, well, this happened," and they were like, "Well, you should have left earlier." But if I did, and I get pulled over, and the officer wants to check to see if I have warrants, those are the things that I go through. Like, I get stopped for being a suspicious driver, and then they go through this whole list of searches to see if there's anything they can possibly find on me.
It's like a foot in the door technique, because they can't, it's like if they get you on something minuscule, then they can then use that to try to figure out if they can get you on anything bigger, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. The entire motto of the police department is to protect and serve, but like, the black experience of police officers is anything but that, really. It sounds like they're not there to protect and serve from your experience.
well, not, I mean, again, I've had great experiences with officers. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when I worked when I was in high school, I worked at a grocery store. There was an officer, two officers actually, that worked there at the store. They knew me by name, and Uh, would hang out and talk to them every single day, and they were really cool, really awesome. But then at the same time, I've had the complete opposite experience with other officers. So it's a matter of, you've got some that are really good and really, take their job seriously,
Yeah.
and then you've got some that are just complete assholes.
Do you think that working as a police officer changes you into somebody who is racist or uses excessive force, or do you think someone gets into it who is like that already?
From what I know, at least, I mean, every experience is different.
Yeah.
So from what I've seen and what I've experienced personally,
Mm-hmm.
some of the officers, especially in Florida specifically, they come in from towns where there's very few people of color. So they have very limited experience when it comes to interacting with people of color. So they take the experience, that one or two incidences that they have in their life, and they take that experience and they carry it over to their job when
Mm-hmm.
they are in a completely different atmosphere, and they just have this biased opinion without opening their mind to different types of people.
Instead of treating people like individuals.
Exactly. Like, I mean, I don't know if a lot of other people would say this, but personally, me, uh, when a person looks at me, the first thing they should know about me is my name. It shouldn't be, oh, well, that's black guy.
Yeah. I created diversity training where I work, and one of the first things that I focused on is how you're not supposed to lead with an adjective and then say the name. Like, you would never say a blind person, you would say a person that is blind. It
Mm-hmm.
is like something that they have, but it is not their identifier. It's
Exactly.
not who they are. Like, I have ADHD, but I'm not ADHD John, although that would make a great YouTube channel name. But but I'm John who also has ADHD. I mean, I feel like, you're not Black Robert, you're Robert, and also one of the defining characteristics about you is that your skin color is black, right? But it's like, it shouldn't be the defining characteristic.
Exactly.
I wonder what has to be done to change that, though.
My opinion, I don't see the point on having the categories that they have on standardized testing and the category that they have on applications. I mean, why does it matter what your skin color is?
I've always wondered about that. I always assumed they were giving preferential treatment to make up for slavery.
Africa is a continent, right?
Yep.
So a person who's in Egypt, they don't call themselves African American. So why is it that a person who's black has to call themselves African American, even though they've actually, even if they have never been to Africa? I've never been there.
Yeah, my take on it is, you're American.
Yes.
There is no descriptor. We're all Americans here. I think that historically people have used the word black in a negative way, but I think that has more to do with the person and the tone they use.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could say black people and say that in a respectful way, versus, some racist out there can say it in a way where you just kind of know he said the same thing I did, but in a different way, and it feels like he said the N-word. And
Yeah.
I think historically that's how people have used it. And then there was a transition where people started using African American to try to get away from that and be more politically correct, I guess. But then it's like, it's kind of gone full circle where that now that's not okay, and it's black is the correct term.
Yeah, I think it's always best if you have the ability to just ask the person how they would prefer to be responded to.
Yeah.
Because some people still want to be responded to as African American, and some people prefer, like, you've got people who are Jamaican American, like they prefer to be responded to as Jamaican American. You've
Sure.
got people who are dark skin and they're from Dominican Republic or
Hmm.
Trinidad, and you've got all kinds of different people that are people of color who identify as black, but they're not African. I mean, I guess any person's roots end up coming from Africa, but you know, they don't identify as such because that's not how they were raised. That's not the culture they were raised in.
Sure.
You've got so many people that have cultural differences, and that's what it really comes down to.
Mm. Well, I think it's kind of like the transgender community. If you ask what pronouns they prefer and then it makes them feel respected, I feel like everyone deserves to be respected and use the words that those people want to be referred to as. So I think that's a good point. Now, I did a little bit of digging around why police officers commit racist actions or seemingly racist actions, because I guess we can't. Something my brother was saying is like he used the term burden of proof. How do you get inside George Floyd's murderer's head and prove that it was a hate crime, that it was racially motivated? It's difficult, at least in the eyes of the law. But a few things that I saw online.
Mm-hmm.
If you've worked as a police officer for a long time, you can have an unconscious bias that's been conditioned into your brain over the years. And then that, like you were saying earlier, you go off the statistics instead of treating people like individuals.
Yeah.
I read that like the institution of police officers kind of fosters deep-seated biases towards certain groups of people, and it creates a power dynamic that's kind of difficult to break. I think one of the things that I did want to ask you, and I think I already asked you this, but when it comes to white police officers committing acts of excessive force against people of color, how much of that do you think is because of a racial component? How much do you think it's just because police officers in general have been taught to use excessive force and that needs to change, but it's not necessarily racial?
It really depends on the person, because I mean, you've got some officers who may have, used excessive force because they were trained that way. You've got some officers who use excessive force who may because they have racial biases.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been proven. You've got officers who have openly, come out and said, "Hey, yeah, I feel this way," and you've got some who are just like who will continue to be in denial over it. I think it's very important for anyone who wants to be an officer to, like, at least from my opinion, I think it's important for them to have access and to be mandated to have psychiatric training, as well as like having mental health doctors, like actually sitting down with a counselor and talking over things, and like having that counselor approve them to be in the field.
We're going to talk about training in the solutions section. We'll get there.
Okay.
We have a lot of stuff to talk about there. Okay. If you could get every racist police officer into one room to listen to you, what would you say to them?
Oh, that's a tough one. Honestly, I would just ask them why.
Yeah.
That would be my first question, is why? Why? What have I done to you that makes you hate me? That would be my question.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, most of us just want to live and be successful. At least I do.
Hearing you say that makes me think about that story about, I don't remember his name, but he was a black man that convinced like hundreds of KKK members to quit. And I feel like he was effective at getting them to think about that question. Why? I wonder how many of these people even stop to think about it, or if it's just like a unconscious thing, like if it's just happening in an unconscious way. And I don't know.
It's education. It's ignorance. It's lack thereof. I mean, if everyone had the same access to the same level of education, then a lot of this divide would be gone. A lot
Yeah.
of it. You've got people not knowing their history. You've got one school that'll teach one history. You've got another school that'll teach another history.
Yeah.
And and some people are just like, oh well, your history is false. My history is the truth. Like, as far as like the Tulsa massacre, there's tons of people that never knew that thing even happened
Hmm.
up until recently. This is a recent discovery for a lot of people, and it's not the first time it's happened. And again, that goes back to education. There's people that do know of it, and there's people that don't.
Yeah.
You've got people in the Black community that don't even know what happened. Some of them don't even know the details of what happened, other than what they've seen on television or what they've seen on the internet.
It almost seems like in some areas, the school board's objective is to keep people ignorant deliberately about certain things.
Yeah,
Because then they know that future generations will grow up with a blank slate regarding that topic. And, uh, you know, maybe they think they can whitewash history that way. Speaking of education and how important it is and people's ignorance, all lives matter. What would you say to people that say that in response to Black Lives Matter?
but people tend to say that because they know exactly what it means when someone says Black Lives Matter. And they know exactly what it means when they come out and say all lives matter. Like, we all know that all lives matter. All lives are matter. Yes, like they do. Is when it comes to the idea of Black Lives Matters, it's pointing out the injustices people in the Black community have experienced.
Yeah.
And it's not just Black people, it's Black, brown. The slogan really covers people of color that have experienced injustices because of the fact of the color of their skin. Look what they did to the Asian American people here during World War II.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't fair to them. That wasn't fair to anyone.
Are you talking about the internment camps?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it all, they gave them, you know, what, $20,000 as reparations for what they've done.
That's crazy. You get more on The Price is Right.
Well, it was you know, back in the 40s, so $20,000 is a lot back then.
Yeah.
So
That's back when a hamburger was 5 cents.
yeah. And then also think about like what they ignored when it came to the Black community when they were enslaved. And a lot of people don't know this because it's not in a lot of history books. It is in some, but not in all of them. But, you know, you've got the Black community, after the slavery ended, they were promised 40 acres and a mule. And then it was taken away after the assassination of Lincoln. They had the right to vote, and then that was taken away. There was the incident that happened in Georgia where they completely pushed out every Black politician that was in office at the time. Then you've got Tulsa, 1920s, where they bombed a community. It was called Black Wall Street. They bombed the whole area. It was bombed and destroyed completely, burned down, and they had to start over. We had to start over.
That's awful.
And then there was another town called Rosewood. Same thing, same situation. It was a town that brought themselves up, and then all of that wealth was taken away.
There's a viral video going around of this really angry Black woman, and she ends the video by saying, "You're lucky that all we want is equality and not revenge."
I
And
saw that video.
I know that her anger is justified.
Yeah.
I think the more you know about history, the more you know that Black people's anger is justified. Like when you see a lot of the things that are happening right now, it's like it's hard not to just watch it and be like, of course this is happening. Yeah.
Like, think about the fact that so many people are against having an open discussion on it. Why?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
Like,
I'm definitely here as your friend to have an open discussion about it.
of
Like,
course.
I mean, my understanding about racism is that it's a system and not an event, and that, white people participate in that system even though we try not to be racist ourselves, we are still part of a racist system.
Hmm.
So I think as white people, we have to use our privilege to help minorities get equality and prevent uh, bad things from happening. We have to act as champions to stand up for people without a voice, and help them have a voice in
Hmm.
society. And so that's personally what I'm hoping to help accomplish from this.
Yeah.
But it's kind of dismal though. Like sometimes you feel like you're just one person, and what difference is that going to make? But I don't know. I believe in the butterfly effect, that everyone can make it like a small change, and it can have a network effect
Yeah.
where it spreads out. Did you see the Ashton Kutcher video going around?
No, no, I have not.
Ashton Kutcher put out a video about all lives matter. He was saying, he's seen a lot of people respond all lives matter to a post that he made when he said Black Lives Matter.
Hmm.
And he said he thought of a really good analogy to explain this to people who say all lives matter, to educate them. And he said um, that he has a daughter and a son, and at night he tucks the daughter in first, and the son was like, why don't you tuck me in first? And he said, because in our house, women go first, because in some scenarios women don't get to go at all, so in our house women go first. And he said, very similarly, we say Black Lives Matter because to some people, Black lives don't matter at all. So that's why we say Black Lives Matter. And I felt like that was a really powerful message,
Hmm.
and a really good way to explain it. One way, anyway.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know if you've seen some of the videos online where, like, there's this woman who spits on a protester. Why? Because he wants equality. There's videos of people who harass uh, Latin American community by telling them to speak English. I mean, America doesn't have a official language. It is just we speak English, but it's not really like it's not mandatory.
These people are threatened because their country is changing before their eyes. And I think the projections are that by 2040, white people will be a minority. And I think they're supposed to be overtaken by the Hispanic population. So, I mean, I think that they're just getting used to not being like the top dog. And I think there's like a generation of people on their way out, maybe
Yeah,
age 50 and up, who are just, they grew up in a different time and it's uncomfortable for them now.
yeah,
But I have hope that younger generations will be somewhat different. I mean, I really do. I hope so. I mean, I know racist parents teach their children to be racist, but I just hope that, with the internet, people are thinking more for themselves. I hope so.
yeah. We can only hope, you know. You know, at the end of the day, we're all human. We all bleed the same. We all breathe the same air,
And we probably all go to the same place when we die.
most likely.
Yeah. Racists go somewhere else. Hope
Yeah.
so.
I mean, the whole idea of hate in general is just dumb.
Yeah.
Like, there's no point on it all at all. Like, why hate another person?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to not understanding each other.
Yeah.
There's this like cultural barrier between people. Like they make these assumptions. Like I can remember going to friends' houses when I was younger, and they'd be like, "Oh, you eat this too?" As if I eat different types of food, or that I don't know what American food is. Like like things like that. Like it's one thing to be like to have a different uh, diet, but to say, "Oh, you know, that's surprising that you eat regular food," is
That's
insane.
strange. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
it was very strange growing up, especially when I came from Florida, or I like moved from New York to Florida, and it was a lot of this like this random, you know, assumptions about who I am as a person, or what I think, or what I like.
Florida is not all Disney World and
No, it's not.
sunshine. I remember living with my girlfriend in Gainesville, Florida, and this guy had a Confederate flag outside his house, and literally next door was a black man who lived in the house and he would sit in his wheelchair outside every day. And I remember being like, man, I can't believe this guy's got this Confederate flag right next door to this black guy. I cannot believe it. I just remember thinking that's so messed up. And seeing like pickup trucks with Confederate flags in the back, and people would drive those around the city, seeing stuff like that, hearing stories about people who dangle nooses outside their window at black drivers. They just like harass. This is not 100 years ago. This is like 5 years ago for me that I
Yeah,
saw this stuff.
there's
You
still
know,
signs up in Alabama and Louisiana that say, whites only and stuff like that. I mean, they don't go. I mean, they don't use them obviously, but they're still there.
yeah. Well, at least one of the good things that's happening because of the George Floyd protests is that all the Confederate statues are coming down.
Hmm.
But before we give the people, like the local government, too much credit for this, it's easy to be like, oh, you know, they've had a change of heart and they've realized that those statues represent racism and hatred, and I'm glad they're taking them down. But what's also going on is the protesters are vandalizing them and damaging them. So there's a theory that they're taking them out to prevent that, and then their plan maybe to just put them back in later.
Well, here's my opinion on those
Historical statues.
historical statues.
Yeah.
My opinion on those is to put them in a museum, allow that museum to be open to the public,
Yeah.
and charge a fee for that museum. And the proceedings, or the money that comes in from the museum, a portion of it go back into the black community.
That's a great idea. I like it for two reasons. One, because of what you just said, and two, any racists that want to go there and see those statues will have to give their own money to to those causes.
Yeah, that way
Which
you're
they
not
will not
destroying.
like.
Which and at the end of the day, you're not destroying their history. It's
There you
still
go.
there.
There you
It's
go.
still there. It's preserved. It's
Yep.
inside of it's in a museum,
Hmm.
because it is American history, regardless of
Sure.
the fact that they lost. And then that the museum is contributing to the community that suffered from it.
Sure. It's just like when I went to Germany and I went to a Holocaust museum. It's like they don't pretend Hitler didn't exist. Like they
Mhm.
talk about him. They have lots of Nazi artifacts in the museum, but it's being put in context. They're not glorifying it. And when you
Yeah,
have it out in public, in a public park, it kind of looks like you
they're
guys like it.
glorified. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you kind of looks like you guys have made it into an idol,
Yeah,
and that's pretty messed up.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Like,
totally agree.
yeah,
Okay. We were talking earlier about how there are some white people out there that say we had a black president, racism is over. They say we live in a post-racial society. What would you say to those types of people out there that they say that racism is a thing of the past? Like why, or better yet, like do they actually believe that, or do you think they have an ulterior motive and they don't believe that?
I think some people believe it, and some people want people to believe it, even though it's not true.
How can some people believe that? Like, what do you think is going on in their head?
We did have a black president, and there are a lot of black people in office, and you've got sheriffs who are black. You've got a lot of people that are representing the community. So it's easy to believe that it doesn't exist when you see people that are in position of power, and it doesn't seem like it exists.
To them.
Exactly. Not to the people that are in power, but to the people who say, "Oh, well, yeah, this look, there's, you've got all these, black celebrities, and you've got black politicians, you've got black news anchors, you've got NASCAR drivers, things like that."
But just because they're represented doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. I mean, I bet those people in those positions of power still experience racism.
Yes, I'm sure they do.
I'm sure Obama faced many racist moments.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course he did. I mean, like, have you seen there are officers and politicians who have been fired from their jobs because they're sharing a photo of Obama with a noose around his neck?
Wow.
Like, that is completely racist. Like, that's not cool.
These people don't understand how the internet works.
I guess not.
They think it's only going to be shown to their like KKK buddies or something.
Also think about, like, there was this Navy official or Navy general. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I read the article briefly. But he went on this racist rant while his Facebook Live was active.
Wow.
So it's like when people aren't looking, when people aren't seeing, when people can't see it, it's there. If no one's looking, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. In relation to police officers, when we see something that looks like racism, but you'll have people out there being like, oh, it was excessive force, but he wasn't doing it because he was racist. There's that like argument. I actually have been thinking a lot about this. And I think the reason, or one of the reasons that white people say this is because the news, like legacy media, like CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, all of these different news outlets, they are not showing police brutality in its entirety. They show snippets of videos and then they talk over it and editorialize it. Not one time have I seen the George Floyd video on TV in its entirety with nobody talking over it. They show, what's his name? Chauvin, Officer Chauvin, his knee on the neck, and they show it for maybe 5 to 10 seconds with somebody talking over it. Show it for 9 minutes. Show it for 10 minutes and let people see the entire video, and you shut up and let people actually see it and hear it. Listen to this guy cry and scream and beg for his life while there are 4 officers with, restraining him and not caring at all. Like, let people actually see it and feel it. And I think a lot of those people that are like, oh, it wasn't racist, it was just excessive force, I think a lot of those people might have a change of heart and be like, you know what? First, I thought it was excessive force. Now I feel like it's excessive force, and that guy doesn't like black people. That's how I feel personally, is I watched the video. Honestly, I couldn't even get through the whole thing. I couldn't even get through it. It was breaking my heart. I couldn't do it. But the point is, I think that news outlets need to do a better job of letting people see the whole video.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the media definitely doesn't help the situation for anyone at all, because they're going to tell their own narrative.
Yeah.
And they're not going to, and in some cases, they're not going to go from personal experiences. They're not going to go from raw experiences. They're just going to go from whatever's going to get more ratings.
Yeah.
Like I watched CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC. I watched all of them, and I watched them do a countdown to curfew to catch looters and rioters, uh, because it was compelling news, and that didn't make anything any better for anyone else. I mean, those businesses suffered. Personally, I mean, and this is my own opinion, I don't believe that that would have been the way to go. I can't justify it in any way.
Justify what?
The destruction of other businesses and destruction of property.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of sad to see that even like businesses run by black people were getting destroyed and looted.
Yeah.
Not Target, but like, you know.
Well, I know also there were people that were mixed in with it that were actually inciting it, and there were people mixed in it that were like trying to cause destruction.
Yeah, like
And that's
agent provocateurs.
yeah, like they had no, like they weren't even in, like they weren't about the protest. They didn't care about the protest. They didn't care about any of it. They just wanted to cause destruction.
Yeah.
There are people there that just, that's all they wanted to do was cause destruction.
It's sad that like if 99.9% of people there to peacefully protest and 0.01% of people are there to break police cars and burn buildings down and steal as much as they can, it's like it dismantles the entire movement. Like the legacy media, you know, on TV, they all they talk about is the riots and it's like if it bleeds, it leads kind of thing, I guess, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but I like, that's how they get more ratings. That's how they get more people to watch their station.
Yeah.
That's what the media does. Unfortunately, the media and news outlets are a necessary evil.
And because it's like a double-edged sword. Like on one side, it gets the word out and it helps people be informed about what's going on. But on the other hand, it can spread propaganda, and the media organization can have an ulterior motive and a slant of what they want you to consume and or like kind of create they can frame it in a certain way so that you think about it in a way that's different than maybe you would have normally thought about it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I think that's why we need more independent news outlets through the internet and less reliance on CNN and Fox News and other legacy media.
Oh yeah, it's coming. I mean, that's what this is. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, in a way, like podcast shows are kind of like little news companies, kind of.
Yeah. It's exactly what it is, because you can't trust the news that you're getting anymore. And if you do, you just have to do the research yourself, realistically. I mean, anybody and everybody should do the research. I think everyone should always want to educate themselves more and look for ways to learn anything and everything that they can, because it's there if you want it.
Okay. There's a term that's been going around. I actually had never heard about it until recently, but it's ACAB. All cops are bastards.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that.
I kind of wanted to talk about that. Are all cops bastards?
No, I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that?
No.
Why do you not agree with that?
Because I'm sure whoever came up with that slogan hasn't had any good experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I've had quite a few good experiences with police officers. Hell, when I was a child, that was I wanted to be a police officer.
Wow.
I wanted to work in law enforcement. I wanted to, that was my dream job, to be honest.
Not anymore.
No. Well, I mean, I kind of decided I can definitely play a cop on television.
I wonder how many black people want to go into working as a police officer to be the change from within.
I can imagine quite a few, especially if depending on the neighborhood they grew up in. I mean, I've had a lot of great experiences with officers, and I've had a lot of bad experiences with officers.
Yeah.
And
I think a term that I hear a lot is, oh, there are a few bad apples. That's the term they use a lot on TV. They're like, yeah, of course there's a few bad apples, but most police officers are good. But I've heard in response to that, someone said like, oh, if you keep creating bad apples, you should grow something else.
I could see that. Like, again, it goes back to part of the policy should be, as far as like how to prevent this from happening, at least when it comes to getting bad cops, is there should always be community oversight.
For sure. But like, okay, let me give you a very specific scenario. So like Officer Chauvin, the one who murdered George Floyd, he had three other officers around him, and for 9-10 minutes they did not do anything to stop this guy from doing what he did. Mm-hmm. And so I think the argument is, if you're a good cop that doesn't stand up against bad cops, you're still essentially a bad cop.
In that particular situation, that was a very unique case.
Yeah.
From my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, there was a couple of one of the officers was actually a rookie.
I read that he did say we should let him up, and he didn't do it or something like that, because he had like 20 years, 30 years of experience, and he had 3 days of experience. So he was a superior.
Yeah.
Well, in general though, like disregarding that specific case, mm-hmm. I think what I've been reading online, when people talk about ACAB and people responding to that by saying, you know, a lot of cops are good. The main thing that I saw that was interesting is someone said, people that say most cops are good are missing the point. We say all ACAB, all cops are bastards, because all cops are complicit in a corrupt system that disproportionately targets people of color, queer people, poor people. And so law enforcement needs to be reformed, but saying law enforcement needs to be reformed is less catchy. And saying something like some cops suck breeds complacency. So I guess they're just trying to like have a term that goes viral to bring attention to it.
Yeah, I get it. I get the idea, but at the same time, it doesn't. It condemns the officer who goes out of his way to support his community. Mm-hmm. It condemns an officer who works overnight shifts to protect the community.
Yeah.
And it condemns officers who go out of their way to support their community. I've seen officers go out of their way to bring food to somebody who didn't have any. I've seen them go out of their way to give people rides who didn't have a ride. I've seen them help people on the side of the road. So There are good cops. There are good police officers.
Yeah.
And then there are bad ones. There are some real bad ones who slip through the cracks.
So I think maybe what people need to be doing is protesting against the system they're a part of, and not try to attack all police officers as a whole.
I agree.
Right?
Yes.
I think the terminology needs to be updated, but people are just mad, and when people are mad, they start acting irrational. Like, I have a friend of mine that made a post on Facebook. They're like, oh, ACAB, and they were ranting about, you know, don't ever tell me that police officers do anything good or whatever. I made a comment that was something like, well, clearly not every police officer is bad, blah, blah, blah. And I wrote up this comment. She deleted it. Some people, they just don't even want to have the conversation. They just want to be mad and blame the every single cop, like all of them. So, but it's interesting to hear that from your perspective, a person that is black, that you don't think that way.
No, don't think that way at all. Because at the end of the day, everyone's human. People are people. Some people make bad decisions. Some people make good decisions. It's like any other situation. You've got people that just do their job poorly. You've got people like I've met police officers who have stereotyped other people because that's all they know. Those are bad cops. Cops that are biased and stereotype people, those are bad officers, and they do not belong on the police force.
Yeah. And
that happens all the time. The only way to get rid of them is to vet them out. And the only way to to vet them out is to have community oversight and have, the community, be able to go in and know who their officers are, know who works in their community. Because if you don't know who works in your community, then you just have people that are guarding you like you're in a prison.
In Seattle, the police officers that came in to deal with the protests, I read something like 80% of them, only 1 in 5 lived in the Seattle area, and the other 4 out of 5 police officers live somewhere else in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's like that is a problem. When you don't feel connected to the people protecting and serving you, they seem like they don't have your best interest at heart.
Of course not. And then there are incidences where you've heard. I don't know if you've followed up on any of the stories about police officers that have quotas. They try to make their quotas as well when it comes to we got to make these amount of stops, or we got to get these amount of tickets.
Yeah, I used to get several speeding tickets in Florida. Guess how many I've got since I've moved to Washington State?
I don't know.
0. It's because the law enforcement is different in Florida. It's different.
Yeah. I got pulled over quite a bit in Florida, and I have not had any currently at all since I've been here, and hope to God that still stays the same.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, I don't have wood near me, so let's find something to knock on.
So, okay, we both agree that some cops are good. They're just trying to do the right thing. They're caught up in a corrupt system that needs reform. But as I mentioned earlier, the argument goes, if good cops don't stand up against bad cops, the good cops are basically bad cops. That kind of logic. I'm not saying that's the case in every scenario, but imagine it is the case, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine that's what's going on. Why do you think those good cops don't stand up against the bad cops?
Well,
are they afraid? They think they'll get fired?
It could be a level of fear. I can imagine that could be part of it. I could imagine losing their job.
Yeah.
Possibly getting framed. There was an officer in New York who was undercover and who was killed by another cop.
Wow. That reminds me of the senator that got maced by the cops in the protests.
Yeah. There was an undercover cop who was shot. He was a black man who was shot and killed by another officer.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And if I'm not mistaken, in the case, he also identified himself as a police officer and was still killed. So, could that have been racially, motivated? Who knows? Only the person who pulled the trigger knows.
Yeah. I was researching this question, why don't good cops stand up against bad cops? And I read, someone made a good point. They said that if a police officer tries to speak out against an injustice, they're often fired or hazed or reassigned, and that there are plenty of recorded instances of this. And because of that, only officers who perpetrate immoral acts or officers that are complicit in allowing these immoral acts will end up succeeding and moving up the ladder in law enforcement. So it's kind of like you learn to play ball. You learn to play ball or you get weeded out. It seems like that is the corrupt system that people are talking about that needs reform. You know, like I think that more good cops could speak up and not have repercussion from speaking up if they were a part of a system that was that would not punish that in some direct or indirect way. So based on our conversation that you don't think all cops are bad, I take it you don't think we should get rid of police officers completely then, huh? Because that's another movement that's going on. When I was at a protest last weekend, you had people chanting to get rid of police altogether.
I think that they can be changed.
Mm-hmm.
You could definitely change the way policing happens in this country. Because the way it works now is not working. Crime is always going to be an issue. It's never going to be a non-issue.
Yeah.
Some crime can be controlled when it comes to like the types of crime, like for instance, petty crime. If people were able to live comfortably and have the things that they need, I think a lot of that petty crime would be gone.
Yeah, so poverty and not having equal opportunity creates a lot of the crime to begin with.
Creates a lot of petty crime, not necessarily like crime in general, but petty crime, yeah. Like, you know, little grocery store robberies, little bank robberies.
Yeah. But that can be the catalyst that leads to a major altercation with police. I mean, this guy, George Floyd, he got arrested over using a $20 bill that he may or may not have known was a counterfeit, but it was just to buy some basic things, you know, at the store.
Well, yeah, and those things happen. I've seen them. I've witnessed them happen before when people have gotten counterfeit money. So they mentioned that Floyd worked at a nightclub. 9 times out of 10, a person at a nightclub has probably given somebody cash that was fake, and Floyd probably received that cash as payment at the end of the night, not knowing it was fake, went to spend it, and that's when it was discovered that it was fake.
Can I tell you what probably would have happened to me if I spent a counterfeit bill at a store? Is they probably would have marked it with one of those pens and then been like, hey, just so you know.
Yeah, they probably would have said, hey, this is not real.
Yeah, but I don't think I would have had to even deal with the police.
Probably not.
Let me give you the argument that I've read about getting rid of police officers completely. My disclaimer, my personal take is I don't think it's realistic. You know, you get rid of all the police officers and we're going to have the mafia coming back to, you know, take over everything. And I don't know if we want that, you know. But one person's interesting opinion that I read is they said reforming the police is too little too late. We're now at a stage where we need to rebuild if necessary instead. So I guess they're not talking about getting rid of it completely, but more so just like a total rebuild from the ground up. They're saying that the culture at police departments is so deep that it has physically altered the brains of those in law enforcement, similarly to those of soldiers in war or prisoners in prison. They have developed these responses to stressors because that's what they've had ingrained from day one. They've been taught it's better to shoot an innocent guy than to let a bad guy shoot you. They've been given hammers and told that nails are everywhere. Even if they find screws, they still use the hammer. I know that people have said that police are doing too much. They're being asked to do so many things and that we should defund them and limit what they do to specific things, but then have people like social workers step in to handle situations that police have traditionally handled. So like domestic violence or rape victims, mentally ill, these can be handled by specially trained social service workers.
Okay.
Crimes against children could have their own department of social workers entirely for physical abuse, for sexual abuse, for neglect. It's like it's very similar to like how fires are handled by the firefighter department. Yeah, or traffic enforcement is handled by the Department of Transportation. Medical emergencies are the EMT's job. So the argument is that the police's job is too big, and we need radical change to defund them and make them just focus on the things they need to that are good for them to focus on, but then take a lot of that stuff off their plate and
have specialists that handle other situations that are makes sense. But I mean, at the same time, you've got domestic violence situations where a gun is involved.
But couldn't they call somebody in if needed?
But then you've got the police doing the job again.
Well, but I think perhaps a social worker could handle the situation most of the time, but then if they feel like their life is in danger or their client's life is in danger or something along those lines, that they could call a police officer for backup.
Mm-hmm. Well, why not have the part of the job curriculum for social workers to have armed training?
I mean, that could work. But now you sound like Republicans who want to arm school teachers.
I mean, they've already armed them.
Some places, yeah. So it's just very controversial because there's a lot of people out there that just hate guns in general and they're afraid of them.
But their guns are out there and you can't avoid the fact that they're there.
That's true. Some people try to put their head in the sand like an ostrich and pretend it's not a thing.
Yeah, you can't avoid the fact that they're there. They exist. The guns are on the streets. Therefore, people who work in these fields like social workers, they need the ways to protect themselves when they go into an environment that's hostile. Especially if a rapist has a gun or a knife and tries to attack them. I'm sure that they can resolve a situation if they have control over a situation. But if they know how to control the situation other than just talking the person down. I understand like not trying to kill someone, but at the same time, that person who's putting themselves in harm's way is going to have to try to protect themselves in some way, shape, or form. But that is also why having community outreach is important. Because if the officers and the people know who the officers are, then 9 times out of 10 you're not going to have those issues.
Well, some people have recommended potentially having some sort of voluntary community self-defense that rotates out, and that would kind of allow for what you're talking about, is like, if your brothers and sisters and friends are taking turns participating, then you would probably feel a lot better about knowing who's enforcing the law. But I think it's just a matter of making sure people are adequately trained. I think that would be my concern, is if, currently police officers they have to get like something like 880 hours of training to be a police officer. Hairdressers have to get twice that much,
Oh yeah, I know. Rachel's a hairdresser, so
your girlfriend, yeah. And that's the minimal amount of training required to be a police officer is shocking, to say the least. My point though was, while a voluntary community self-defense sounds good in theory, I don't know how comfortable I would feel unless they had adequate training. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's realistic, but have you heard about in Minneapolis, they have actually agreed to disband their police.
We'll see how that goes. I think that there are other ways. Like, for instance, it seems very fictional, but there was this show that came on. There was only one season of it. APB, All Point Bulletin. That's what it is. All
Okay.
Points Bulletin. So the show itself was where this tech billionaire, and they almost made him seem like he was Elon Musk, designed an application that allowed the community to police. So if the police were looking for a suspect, a person could take their phone out and help locate the person they're looking for.
Oh, cool.
And the police could use that in order to track the location and get there quicker.
Mm.
It's a lot like the app that we have now called Citizen.
Yeah, which they're using for contact tracing for COVID.
Yes.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that technology is going to change the way that law enforcement is done, for sure. And I think they will be leaning more on everyday citizens for help.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, like, if you like, for instance, that app is really cool because it allows people to, not only like see what's going on in their own community, but also be involved.
Yeah.
At a safe distance, obviously.
So we've reached the solutions section of this episode. I wanted to dedicate some time to talk solutions because I think that that's an important thing to discuss. And I know you've mentioned some earlier on very briefly, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to hear from your perspective. Like, what do you think needs to happen when it comes to police reform?
So, for my opinion, I think it's a matter of just giving the officers continued training.
Mm-hmm.
They need psychiatric training.
Mm-hmm.
It would be helpful for officers in the field to also have some medical training. There have been incidences in the past where officers have shot a person who was non-threatening because they were unaware that the person was autistic.
Wow.
So they were unaware. So they used excessive force on a person who was autistic.
Or like, what if somebody's deaf and they don't follow verbal orders to put your hands up? You're gonna get shot.
Yeah, things like that. Like, the sensitivity training is important.
Mm-hmm.
Also, being able to go into a community without being biased and without assumption of guilt to the person you're investigating, because there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of assumption of guilt when it comes to talking with a person of color. Well, they assume guilt, and so they treat the person as if they're a criminal when there isn't even a crime.
Mm-hmm. Like, they know they're guilty of something, they just haven't figured out what.
Yeah. And again, it's not all cops. It's not every single one of them. Mm-hmm. There's just a few. But that also goes across, that happens also outside of the police as well. You've got, the case of that woman in the park who called the police on a man who just said, hey, you have to have your dog on a leash.
Yeah.
He just tried to, just inform this woman, hey, you're in a part of the park that requires a dog or a leash for your dog. And she immediately said, oh, I'm going to call the cops and say a black guy's threatening me.
Yeah. She weaponized his race.
Exactly.
She used him being black as like a way to terrorize him.
Exactly.
Like calling the police and being like, there's a black person doing X is kind of like putting out a hit. It's like putting a hit out on a black person in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, all of this stuff isn't like it's new. It's not new to me. It's not new to the community.
Yeah.
It's things that have been happening for a long time, and it's only coming to light now because of social media. That's
Yeah.
what it is. Smartphones and the internet.
I read Will Smith said this isn't new. It's just there are more cameras.
Exactly.
He's right for sure.
Everybody's getting their 15 seconds of fame.
So on the topic of training, I had written down that, basic law enforcement academy is only 720 hours, whereas, being a cosmetologist, it requires 2,000 hours, and it's like if hairdressers have to study, for 2-3 times as much as you do, but you're the one holding a gun and potentially taking someone's life, you need more training. And like you mentioned, like bias and awareness training is good. But also, I don't know if you mentioned this, but de-escalation methods. I had that written down. That in the U.S., in the United States, police have a policy of escalation. Police officers are instructed to use a degree of force one higher from whatever the suspect is doing. And while it's a fair strategy from the context of keeping police officers safe, it's flawed for sure. And if an officer chooses de-escalation, they're basically turning away from their training that they've been given. And so I read that one of the proposals for police reform is to potentially offer some kind of financial compensation that rewards good cops with consistent track records of being able to de-escalate a situation without the use of force. Like every time you deal with a person, whether they committed a crime or not, and you find a way to de-escalate it, that is somehow tracked and rewarded. I think that's a great system of positive reinforcement.
I agree.
So yeah, that's one idea. What about the use of force with police officers? How would you go about reforming that specific topic? Obviously, you're against excessive force. I think everyone is, unless you're a terrible person.
The use of force really comes down to the situation at hand, really.
Yeah.
I think that if there is ever a situation where there is a use of force, the camera feed for that situation should always be available to the public.
Sure. And audited by a third party.
Yes. And
I don't think police officers should be able to turn it off or on. I think it should always be running.
I agree. I think it should always be running. I don't think they quite have that worked out yet to where they can make it all, constantly running. I guess it's all a matter of getting the right camera with having a network connection constantly.
I think it's not a bug. It's a feature that they can turn it off.
Yeah, it is. It's a feature.
Like it's intended. And I just saw a video where a police officer turned off their microphone because they didn't want people to hear that he was being lectured by his superior. So they can mute the microphone too.
Yep. Mm-hmm. I think that, nowadays, like I said, I still agree with the idea of, unless a cop is undercover, if they're on duty and it's their normal beat, the video feed should be live. I think that they should elect a community leader who has access to the footage and could view the footage and just watch the footage, and that is their job.
Kind of like an air traffic controller.
Yeah.
That would be exhausting.
But it's a volunteered position. It's an elected position.
You'd have to swap out a lot.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it wouldn't be like one person. It would just be a group of people who are selected, who who are like who run for it. Like, I'm gonna run for to be your community monitor, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And if they win, then of course they get to elect people that they choose to work with them, and then the community gets to approve on it. If they don't approve of the people that they elect, then that person elects, then the community gets to put up a person that they would like to elect.
I like it.
So then you've got multiple people in there. They're all put into place. So it's basically like a community president who monitors police cams, and then they have to, if there's anything that's illegal or out of the ordinary, that officer has to come in before the community committee and explain his situation. And if for any reason he lies about the situation, he could be terminated or he could be arrested,
Mm-hmm.
just like anyone else, if he commits a crime.
Sounds better than what we currently have, for sure.
Yeah. So that you still get to keep policing, and then you still get to create a community oversight, and then that the video doesn't get seen by any other person.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a particular situation where the police officers are undercover and they're investigating a specific person, you have to also hold the people that are viewing this image accountable as well. So by creating documentation saying they will not release any of this information to the public unless there is a crime committed by the officer.
Gotcha. I think that would be a good system to implement for sure, and hopefully that's something that we start to see manifest in society.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see why it would be an issue, to be honest. I mean, yes, it would take a lot of man hours to do that. It would take tons and tons of man hours, but if that's their dedicated job,
I think it's necessary to restore trust in police officers by Americans. I think the trust is gone. The trust has been gone for Black people, and now it's very rapidly disappearing for white people as well.
yeah.
But as far as violence goes, just to wrap that bullet point up, there's been a call for a ban on chokeholds in general. No more chokeholds. No more knees on the neck kind of thing. And obviously, like, deadly force should not be used unless absolutely necessary. And the criteria for using deadly force, I think, needs to change. And, I feel like a reason why deadly force gets used more flippantly is that police officers are not held accountable the same way that we are. That
True.
if something happens, especially before the social media video camera age where everyone's filming them, if something happens, most of the time, either they get away with it. I mean, if something happens that's corrupt, either the police officer gets away with it, or if they get in trouble, they'll just get put on paid leave, which doesn't even seem like a punishment. Or they'll be asked to resign and they'll just go work at a different police department. So it's like, oh, they just can't work in that one anymore. Kind of like when Catholic priests were molesting children and then they would just be transferred to a different church. That is unbelievable. Yep. Unbelievable corruption. There needs to be more accountability, right?
Yeah. And the only way that you get more accountability is if you have community oversight. And then you make it to where if there is a prosecution, if there is an investigation,
mm-hmm.
and the police officer is held accountable, he has to pay his own legal fees. He or she has to pay their own legal fees.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. So how familiar are you with this concept of qualified immunity?
Not too familiar with it. Not too
So
familiar with it.
I actually wasn't either until just recently. I've seen a lot of protest signs that say "end qualified immunity." I had to look it up, but basically the gist of it is that police officers are held to different standards than you and I. That they don't necessarily follow the same laws that we do. Let me read it to you. It says qualified immunity is a legal doctrine in the United States federal law that shields government officials from being sued for discretionary actions performed within their official capacity unless their actions violated a quote unquote clearly established federal law or constitutional right. And I guess the problem with it being clearly established is, and I just heard John Oliver talking about this on his television show, that more often than not, if whatever the police officer does, if their situation doesn't match some precedent that happened in the past where that police officer got in trouble, then you basically get off scot-free. But the reason I was bringing it up is the people that are saying we should eliminate qualified immunity, they're talking about requiring police to carry personal liability insurance. And so if Chauvin, for example, kills a black man, instead of the police department getting sued by his family, it wouldn't come out of taxpayer funds. It would come out of his insurance policy, and his, just like getting into a car accident, like your rates go up, like his rates would go up, his premiums would go up, and then maybe it would become too expensive to keep him on the force, and he would lose his job, and then other police departments in other cities wouldn't want to hire him because he'd be too much of a liability. So it's like putting more of the liability on the person instead of the police department or the taxpayers, which I think is a good idea. But I don't know. I don't know a ton about this topic. All I know is that I think police need to be held more accountable.
Yeah, they definitely should be.
So we've talked about training. We've talked about violence. We've talked about qualified immunity. We've talked about defunding the police and how we could potentially take some of that budget and put it into like social work, right?
Yep.
I actually read something funny about that too. So a friend of mine said, "Why do you think defunding the police means we won't have any cops at all? We've been defunding schools for years and they still exist." It's pretty good. I think something that you mentioned earlier. I think something that you mentioned earlier is that if people weren't poor, they wouldn't feel the need to commit petty crimes. And so like on the citizen side, there's things that can be done, like making sure that people are taken care of.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a problem with our capitalistic society.
Of course. I mean, our capitalistic society it's not sustainable. I don't believe it was ever meant to be sustainable. At least not for everyone.
I think a big thing that needs to change is to end the war on drugs, and addiction should be treated as a health issue and not a legal one. I think that that's a foot in the door technique to arrest people, specifically marijuana. Like, so many people get arrested for marijuana possession, and it's just ridiculous how it's like legal in half the country, and then you go to the wrong state and you could get in serious trouble. It's just seems like that's a huge opportunity.
Well, I mean, think about how many people are still in prison now for it, and it's legal. It was open the entire time during the lockdown.
Yeah. Did you hear what Elon Musk said about that?
Yeah, I did.
He was like, hey, marijuana is considered an essential business. Meanwhile, people are in prison for it. something tells me like we should probably let those people out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, as long as they didn't commit some violent crime as well, like as long as they didn't kill anyone or something.
Well, in some cases they didn't.
I think another issue is that in America, we don't really have adequate resources for the mentally ill. And so we just like let them roam the streets, and those people can end up causing trouble that police officers don't really know how to sufficiently deal with those people. And we should have more resources for people with mental health issues.
Yeah, we should. We definitely should. I mean, that's a lot of the drug addictions that are plaguing a lot of communities, and it's lack of it's how they treat them. I mean, like for instance, think of the whole you've got the war on drugs, right? And then you have the opioid crisis. They were both drugs. But one community was condemned. The other community was treated as if it was just a
Crisis.
crisis.
Because one drug comes from the streets, one drug comes from your doctor. But it's like they're both terrible for your health.
But they were both eventually led to the streets.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, like, think about it. Like, when you think about, like, crack, for instance, where did that come from?
The FBI.
CIA.
CIA.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they created it, but I know there's
didn't
proof.
create it.
There's proof that they brought it into the black communities to disrupt it.
Yeah. I don't know if that was necessarily was the plan, but there is proof of it, yes. And there is like they brought cocaine into the community, and then of course cocaine was then formed into crack.
And they're basically the same drug, but crack carried a stricter penalty up until the mid 90s. And
because it was primarily in the black community.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I was in college, I can't tell you how many parties I went to where you see white people consuming cocaine like it's a beer, right? And if police officers ever get called to those parties for like a noise disturbance and they see it on the table, they do nothing. They don't do anything. But you're right. Like if they caught a black person with crack, they'd probably try to throw them in jail for as long as they could. And then we have the private prison industrial complex where it's what Kanye West talks about, but it's basically slavery 2.0, where it's like, meet the quote, you got to fill the quotas for these private prisons and then make people work for pennies on the dollar. It's like slave labor.
Yeah.
For crimes that shouldn't even be a crime.
Exactly. I mean, you saw the one case I shared to you about the black man who spent 28 years in prison because a woman dreamt that she was raped by him.
That's unbelievable.
And then you got somebody like Brock Turner who was sentenced to 6 months and only spent 3 months in jail. And they kept him in solitary confinement away from general population. What is that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and then there's another incident where there's a guy who spent 5 years in prison, and he was going to go to the NFL. He lost his entire future. Spent 5 years in prison because somebody said that he raped them.
Yeah.
And it wasn't true. They told the truth 5 years later after he spent 5 years in prison.
You know where we're going, Robert, is I don't know if you've ever seen that TV show Black Mirror, but there's this one episode.
Oh, I've seen it.
Okay. Have you seen the episode where there's your vision, like everything you see is stored on like a hard drive and you can like rewind it and go back in your life?
Mm-hmm.
So like that becomes like the way that becomes the new evidence that police officers use in a case. So like I think eventually we're going to move beyond the he said, she said arguments that get people arrested and put in jail, and we'll move to a new era where, you know, people like Elon Musk with their Neuralink little brain computers will enable this ability to store our memories. And once that occurs, I think then the truth will reign. The truth will be more likely to impact these court cases.
True. I believe that. I believe that that's
maybe not in our lifetime, but
you know, I believe it might be in our lifetime. To be honest, I wholeheartedly believe that it will definitely be something that will come up in our lifetime.
Wow.
Because think about how quickly technology advances. Think about the fact that we had the first iPhone in 2007, and it's 2020, and look at the phones that we have now.
I feel like I should have been able to buy a flying car by now.
Well, that's because the technology is there, but we don't have the infrastructure to support it.
I think the government is afraid of people flying around. Okay, well, anyway, there are some more things that I wanted to mention, but we don't have to go through it. But basically, I wanted to wrap things up. Like, as my guest, I wanted to give you like the final word. Is there anything that you would want to leave our viewers out there with, any messages, words of wisdom, or calls to action that you'd like to end this video on?
Well, I would like to just say, you know, we are all the same people, just like you. We wake up every morning, put our shoes on, walk out the door, go to work. We come home, take care of our families. Not all of us are criminals, and not all of us are trying to take advantage of people or the system. Some of us work really, really hard to try to accomplish our goals that we set out for ourselves every single day. And at the end of the day, we just want to be treated the same way as everyone else, without having to deal with the idea of being called a criminal every single day, or treated like a criminal every single day. And I would love to just live my life and not be afraid that someday a cop is going to kill me at a traffic stop because he had a bad day. That's it.
I think it's hard to hear you say that and know that what you're saying is true, and wishing that this world was different, and feeling helpless that I don't feel like it's in my power to just like fix it.
Yeah. It's not in my power either, man.
Maybe if we both snap together, though. But I mean, like I was saying in the beginning of this video, I believe in the butterfly effect, and I just hope that like enough small change will lead to a bigger change for the good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Robert, thanks for being on the show. I
Thanks
appreciate
me,
you doing this interview until the late hours of the evening.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun. I definitely want to do it again.
All right. Thanks for being on the show. Talk to you later.